It's 6 o'clock in London, 1 p.m. in New York, USA, 1 a.m. in Hong Kong, 3 a.m. in Sydney. It's only 10 o'clock in the morning if you're in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Meanwhile, it's 10:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Patrick L. Young, and this is my third LinkedIn live stream coming to you over the interweb from Valletta, the historical capital of Malta. IPO Video Live is the new live stream in Patrick's opinion, where I delve into matters and moment in the financial and business world. And indeed, I'm lucky enough to have some wondrous guests who join us for these discussions. We're streaming to the world right now via LinkedIn and YouTube. Episode 1, just in case you missed it, was Flukenomics, discussed by myself all about the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the issues relating to the economics and the financial world as a result of that. Last week, we introduced our first guest. The fascinating Christopher Messina joined us from Melbourne in Florida. He was discussing from AI fintech to nickel mining in his role as CEO of CrowdPhil, a very innovative platform for the new world of financial markets, inspired indeed, some might say, by things like the capital market revolution. This week, we've got a great guest, Peter Randall. He's just backstage at the moment. He's going to be joining us in a few minutes. Meanwhile, thank you very much, everybody who's been sending over commentary during the course of the last week. Really, really appreciate all of the feedback. It's actually been sensational how much of it was positive. Thank you for all of the suggestions you've been making. I'm delighted to say we now have a scintillating guest roster all the way out to the end of August, but we're going to be building on the September guest list as soon as we finish this live stream. Send us your comments, send us your questions for Peter Randall at any point in time. This is a live stream about, well, everything to do with all manners of business, markets, and investment. So today we have another bumper episode in store, revolutionizing the value chain from Chi-X to SETL, with our special guest, Peter Randall. He's going to be coming up in a moment. But meanwhile, this week in business, a couple of stories that struck me as rather interesting. First of all, well, I think it's been in headline news just about everywhere around the world. Microsoft are in advanced talks to buy TikTok's US business. In fact, actually, it's TikTok's business in the United States of America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Well, to put it mildly, that does seem a very exciting new line of business for a company whose previous major excitement on the desktop, apart, I suppose, from Age of Empires, how ironic that looks in retrospect, given Microsoft's own position in the software world. But previously, of course, they gave us the incredible dancing paperclip in an Excel spreadsheet. Well, TikTok explainer videos could be an exciting way to help make Microsoft Office products much more fun, I suppose. Of course, there's also the question of what might this entity be called. Microsoft, given they're negotiating on these 4 major territories, starting with the United States and propagating out across the Anglosphere. I don't know, TikSoft, perhaps? Maybe we're looking at Microtalk in the future. It was also fascinating to see, of course, the commander-in-chief, President Trump, giving himself another added role. He seems to be investment banker-in-chief, as he expects a hefty commission for the US Treasury as a result of essentially helping to make Microsoft a bigger tech business. That seems to be an interesting, of course, corollary to the fact that last week we had lots of the major tech bosses appearing in Washington, D.C., where the focus of Congress and the Senate seemed to be very much on trying to make some of the big tech companies smaller. Out there in the big world of results, Google had their first ever revenue decline as a set of results. The stock promptly dropped more than 4% on the day last week. But then again, that leaves it up over 20% year on year. So no cause for celebration amongst the Luddites yet. It's still technology that's powering the NASDAQ index to, I believe, 29 highs so far this year. Hashtag despite COVID. In the UK, Reuters were noting the other day that some 53% of the UK's £2.5 trillion, that's getting on for $3 trillion, serious money, of government bonds are now trading on a negative yield basis. I'll repeat that. Over half of all of Britain's government debt is now trading on a negative yield basis. In other words, effectively, they're asking you to pay them to buy their debt, which is quite incredible. The British gilt yield curve For those of you who studied economics during the course of the last 20 years, you may not actually even have ever seen a yield curve in these quantitatively eased times. Maybe we'll get an artist to draw one for us so you can see a representation pictorially of what a classical yield curve would actually look like, and we can present it in a future show. Anyway, the point is the British gilt yield curve all the way out to 8 years has yields in negative territories. And by the way, by the time you reach 10 years on the British gilt government bond yield curve, you're getting a rocketing 0.07%. Maybe that's a marketing tie-in with the new James Bond film, which is finally going to be coming up sometime during the course of the next quarter or so. Can't remember what it's called at the moment. Something or something and somebody dies or something like that. Not to be confused with, of course, Victory or Death, which is my latest book. However, one of them, of course, is a tale of daring do, excitement, wonderful, incredible intrigue that travels all around the world, while the other is, of course, a James Bond movie, just in case you're mixing the two up. Nonetheless, going back to the world of European markets, and it's a pleasure to see Peter Randall joining us in the studio this evening. The pool of negative yielding government bonds in the Eurozone now amounts to 5.68 trillion euros. Which is 6.67 trillion US dollars, I believe, or around 65% of all European government bonds are now currently effectively trading at a negative yield. That's a pretty catastrophic number from start to finish, with negative real interest rates ripping us across the world. And of course, as I think it was JP Morgan said this week, they're expecting the possibility of there being maybe a 10% pullback in the Nasdaq. But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, they were quick to say it's only one of those summer blip things. It might happen around about August the 14th because people will get a bit worked up about the mid-month numbers. Thereafter, it'll all be, well, shiny, wonderful, happy, great news, joyous, wonderment, delight as the stock market goes back into the stratosphere once again. And thank you indeed, an anonymous LinkedIn user. I'm going to attribute that one to Jimmy Froelich. It's good to see you, Jimmy. Thank you very much for tuning in. Perhaps I'm wrong, but 7 basis points on a 10-year gilt bond. Yes, riches beyond imagination. Absolutely incredible. Slap up meals for the children all round when those divvy checks come in every year. Over at Interactive Brokers, meanwhile, just talking about the whole strength of the US stock market, they've reported some stunning numbers which suggest that the current excitement in the parish of stock exchanges is going to carry on for quite some time yet. They now have 40% increase in client users over the course of the last year, 4% up month on month, and that amounts to 913,000 client accounts. Now, that's pretty cool given the fact that Interactive Brokers are at the lowest common denominator. They are seen as being the really, really smart money in the world of retail trading, a lot of ex-professionals and so on, as well as smaller money managers. More excitingly, their ending client equity for the first half of the year was for the end of July rather, was none less than $218.6 billion, which is 40% higher than the prior year, and indeed 5% up month on month, suggesting that either somebody was sending money to their accounts or possibly some IBKR folks are making rather like bandits in the profit zone. Meanwhile, in China, the Chinese police have taken down a $6 billion plus token Ponzi. They arrested 109 people. At the same time, China's planning to give foreign investors more market access. Just as well, they're clearing up the marketplace before those foreign investors get in and could possibly be scammed then. So, ladies and gentlemen, we arrive at the point where we have our special guest today. Revolutionizing the value chain from Chi-X to SETL is the topic today, with one Peter Randall. We're featuring him. He's a capital market revolutionary throughout the course of the last 20 years and more. Peter led Chi-X as it upended the European equity marketplace. As a founder and CEO, he created one of the top 5 trading venues in Europe for shares before moving on to Equiduct, which he turned into Europe's fastest growing trading platform in 2012. He brings a wealth of experience across financial markets, and nowadays Peter is president of the blockchain vendor SETL. We'll be talking about that and many more things, including, I do believe, central bank digital currency will come up during the topic of conversation today. But let me just also add, he appears in this tome, the world's most influential people in market structure. That volume, which I produced in 2017, a new volume will be out in the near future, Peter ranked no lower than 183 in the world's most important people and exchanges. And here's the rub, ladies and gentlemen. At that juncture, he was the #1 go-to figure in capital market structure for blockchain. It doesn't get much more sexy than that as an introduction. Good evening, Peter. How are you today?
Patrick, as ever, I'm delighted to be here, and your loquaciousness and charm far, far, far outweighs my modest achievements that they are.
Where are you today in the world, Peter?
I'm in my study in a very rural part of the world, which is west of Oxford, and I'm sitting here where I've sat now for probably since the middle of March, and I like to refer to it not so much that I'm working from what you might call home, but that I'm living, as you might describe it, in the office.
Brilliant description. So, Peter, tell us a little bit about yourself. You've had a multi-starred and exciting career. Let's go a little bit back in history. Where did it all begin?
It all began, I suppose, way back in history at the redoubtable London School of Economics, where I read law. I went into the city in the early 1980s as an analyst, recruited by James Capel quite quickly, headhunted by them from the firm that I started with. Ended up as a partner there, moved to the Far East, spent 20 odd years in the Far East, mainly in Hong Kong, but also Singapore and Japan and Australia. So lived in a fair number of very exciting marketplaces. Then joined Instinet, which was effectively electronic markets, and was executive director of Instinet through to about 97. Then I was spent some time consulting in Asia, having left Instinet, and worked for people like Flemings and good old people like that, Credit Suisse, and some Credit Lyonnais, those sorts of folk, mainly on sort of how to turn their voice brokering into electronic brokerage, with good degree of success. Taps on the shoulder to run fixed protocol, which I did for a little while, and then Instinet came back and said, "Look, we're thinking of taking the company private. We're thinking of taking the company private, and would you care to join as a COO in Europe, effectively outside the United States?" And I said, "Yeah, I would." My day job there was making the business as cost effective as possible. And my other day job was working in business development and setting up something which we'd spotted, which was this tome of paper, which was yay thick, which said MiFID on the front, where I coined the phrase which some people have heard and some people even laugh at. But MiFID for me stands for most institutions find it difficult. I was one of those people that read it. I'm very sad. I read it, and there were two pieces to MiFID that were really important. One was the fact that the authorities would no longer enforce the concentration rule. The concentration rule was that if you traded in the equity of one particular country, you had to do that on the national exchange of that particular country. And secondly, arguably more important, there was a very important piece that said that the whole best execution element to MiFID was that they were going to start to look at the total costs of trading, the total costs of ownership, as a way of getting to a closer and tighter return for ultimate end investors. Great, fantastic. Nobody else had seemed to spot it. I was always worried that people had spotted it, but nobody else had. So really simple story. There've been lots of opportunities in Europe to try and compete before with the incumbent exchanges, and for a variety of reasons, they'd all failed. The last big one before Chi-X was the Dutch trading service, DTS, of the London Stock Exchange. That, of course, failed for the very simple reason that maybe the trading venue was cheaper, but the response of the owner of the Dutch Stock Exchange, Euronext, was to just push the price of post-trade up. So it was no cheaper to an investor to actually, split liquidity. So it became very obvious very quickly that if you wanted to win at this game, you had to have at least two legs of the stool. And the stool, let's say, has three legs. It has a trading piece, it has a clearing piece, and it has a settlement piece. So we very, very swiftly determined that we could build the technology for the front end for the trading piece. In fact, we had a very good system that was able to do that very effectively. But we would need to also be able to offer either clearing or settlement. Of course, you couldn't offer settlement because that was just too complicated, but we could offer clearing. And working together with a variety of industry leaders. I would certainly mention Getco and Optiva and others as being important in that area. Something called EMCF, European Multilateral Clearing Facility, was established. That meant that no longer did the incumbent exchanges, whether they be Euronext, Deutsche Börse, London Stock Exchange, or anywhere else, have the actual capacity to get you effectively by the short and curlies. So if we were going to be 10 times cheaper, which is what we actually were in terms of the pricing to users. Vodafone was Vodafone was Vodafone, Alcatel was Alcatel was Alcatel, Telefonica was Telefonica was Telefonica. You were able to buy them at the place where you get the best price, but you could also pay a lot less charges to do it. Now, this is really important, Patrick, for a very simple other reason, which is that we, coming as it were from the sell side, were very in tune with what the buy side was doing. And the buy side had really changed from, let's say, the year 2000 through till 2005. There'd been a fundamental shift in buy side behavior. And that fundamental shift in buy side behavior was caused in very large part by a fundamental shift in the actuarial treatment of their returns. The actuarial treatment of their returns. So in the past, there would be any fund manager name you wish, UK fund. There would be any fund manager you wish, French fund, German fund, Swedish fund, Spanish fund, or whatever. And then there would be a few, Pan-Iberian recovery trusts or whatever else. So these were organized very, very strongly around country-based indices. Coming effectively out of Frank Russell and some of the other more enlightened index providers, came the idea that actually, instead of saying that there should be funds divided by countries, how would it be if funds were divided by sector? So it then became, let's say, a European technology fund or a European telecommunications index. There would become a European retail index, which would take the best example of retail from all the way across Europe. That was a very different type of behavior. And of course meant that if you happen to be a fund manager, if you happen to be on the buy side, sitting there as the manager of, let's say, the European Telecom Fund, for any fund manager you care to name, You were now able to buy Telefonica, you were now able to buy Alcatel, you were able to buy Deutsche Telekom, you were able to buy Ericsson and Vodafone and BT. So you were able to buy the best of breed. But of course, if you wanted to buy the best of breed, let's say you had 10 different domestic exchanges where these things were traded, you had to have links and connections and charges and fees and all the rest of it to 10 separate exchanges. Whereas along came Chi-X, and we'd said, okay, you can buy Telefonica. We're as absolutely as agnostic about Telefonica as we are about BT, as we are about France Telecom, as we are about yada, 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 yada. So they only needed one. They only needed one, as opposed to 10. And as opposed to 10, each of which had its own connectivity protocols, none of which were standard, we had just one standard. It was called FIX, Financial Information Exchange. So making it simpler and making it cheaper, surprise, surprise, people liked it and used it. And that, if you will, is the genesis of the whole Chi-X experience. In terms of what we actually did, I remember sort of a fairly famous meeting that we had pretty soon on. As soon as I was tapped on the shoulder and told to take this thing on and see what I could do with it. We got a bunch of people, you know, who were experts in different areas come trooping through my office one after another saying, oh, I need you to sign this contract for this. Oh, I need you to sign this for this. You know, we've got to have this agreement with this data center provider because we're going to need all these boxes. And we've got to have this agreement with you know, this information provider because we're going to need to do all these sorts of things. And I said, look, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to sign any of these. We're all going to sit in a room and we're going to agree what it is that we're actually going to do first before we start doing anything, certainly before we start signing it. Now, that was quite an interesting meeting because I guess having read law all those years ago, I was, you know, able to sort of say to myself, you never, ever, ever ask a question that you don't know the answer to. And I basically said to all of them, look, guys, what I want to do is I want to split the room in two. And I want you, and you to go out and work out why every single platform that's ever been started in Europe in the past has not been successful. And equally, you, and you, I want you to go away and research why it is that platforms in the United States, whether they be called Archipelago or whether they be called Instinet or whether they be called whatever, have been successful. What is it that they're doing that works and what is it that is not working in Europe? And let's come back in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time or whatever, and then let's have a seminar. And the reasoning behind that was to try and avoid making the mistakes that had previously been made. We were going to make our own mistakes anyway, but also to copy unashamedly what had worked. You know, why wouldn't you do that? What we copied was the idea of effectively co-ownership, jump ball. And my good friend and erstwhile competitor, now fortunately retired and probably enjoying his farm in Cornwall, David Lester, at the London Stock Exchange. David would often say, publicly as well as privately, he would often say that the co-ownership model, i.e. allowing our users to own stock in Chi-X, was something that was impossible to compete with. So that was very, very powerful. So that was copied. Directly, if you like, from the US. Equally, ideas around governance, having people on the board from the users, and things we tried to avoid was this whole fandango around having lots of competing clearing and settlement venues. It was the right equation. The other thing we avoided as well was building a business that was predicated on selling data. Because when you start the business, if you do one trade, you have one piece of data. After 6 months, you might have 10 pieces of data, or 10,000 pieces of data, but you've certainly got nowhere near as much data as the London Stock Exchange would have, for example. So who is going to pay you for data which is pretty incomplete? Nobody. So therefore, don't build a business that requires you to have data sales to keep the lights on in the marble banking hall. So that was
so there's a fascinating history. I mean, just quite incredible altogether to hear how these things came together. So let's jump, somewhat forward. By the way, let me just say greetings to Christopher Messina. Sorry, you're coming up as anonymous LinkedIn user. So thank you for your 7 basis point quip in the gilts. And also, it's interesting to see the number of questions we're getting. So we have one actually already, which is, how did you address the lack of cross-clearinghouse netting, Peter?
Yeah, that was a very interesting question. I think the initial answer was that effectively the incumbents just took the view that it would never ever be successful. Never. It was never going to work. So there was no need for them to change things. But because it was so much cheaper, and not only were we cheaper, but EMCF was cheaper, in a sense, cross-clearinghouse netting initially was dealt with literally through the price system. And you were dealing largely one side of nearly every trade, certainly initially, was a high-frequency provider. And as we all know, those high-frequency guys are very often flat at the end of the night. So we were, I think we were sort of kind of lucky, but it was pricing that got us low. And then, if you remember, there was that whole sort of period of, how should we say, regulatory cooperation. Maybe that's the best way, most polite way, at least, of describing it, which resulted in all the sort of interconnectivity work that never really went anywhere. And recently we've obviously seen the merger between EuroCCP and EMCF, and now latterly the purchase of that business by, in fact, the successor in title to Chi-X, which of course is CBOE. Very interesting. Thank you very much, Christopher Messina. You're the person making those anonymous, well, they're coming up as anonymous through the data feed. There's an API issue, if ever there was one, ladies and gentlemen. Christopher Messina, our excellent guest last week, asking this week's guest, Peter Randall. Ladies and gentlemen, do you have a question for Peter? Please send them over. Any comments or remarks will be welcome. Thanks to you for all the comments you've been making already. And of course, if you're fascinated by the wonderful world of market structure, do please join me daily in the Exchange Invest Daily newsletter, which is available for subscribers throughout the world and read by all the most important people in financial market structure. So, Peter, jumping forward today, it's a radically different world to where we are. Your former Chi-X empire has all gone off through another life into SIBO, and it remains to this day a massive trading enterprise across the European marketplace. Tell us a bit about what you're up to now. I will happily do that, Patrick. What I want to do, though, before I go there, if you will, is distill the learning that I think I got, certainly, from what Chi-X represented. And I think when I've done that, you can see why I make the remarks that I do make. So distilling that learning. Effectively, what Chi-X really was about at a technological level was putting 21st century technology, the matching engine had been developed in 2005-06, into an industry group London Stock Exchange, Deutsche Börse, Euronext, that was still running their matching engines COBOL on mainframes. Expensive, yeah, because you had to have a cast of thousands of people involved in waking the thing up, in making sure that it was operating properly, giving it its milk, making sure it was nice and warm, taking it to the toilet, wiping its bottom, giving it a bath, and putting it to sleep at the end of the night, every night. Cast of thousands doing this. Apparently there was one very famous exchange in Europe that had a sign on the windows saying that employees are forbidden from looking out of the window during the morning so that they've got something to do in the afternoon. Many, many people not doing very much very often, but essentially that they were there in order to do all those nice things to sort out the welfare of the trading system. Now, by using 21st century technology that could be affected from, effectively a series of people running a control center in a Docklands warehouse, connecting to data centers spread around Europe, it was very, very easy to cut costs. And that was the big thing. It was a real attempt to do that. So there seems to me to be three lessons. Lesson one, your technology has got to be appropriate. If it's low cost, that's even better. 21st century technology, lower cost, obviously, than 20th century technology. And in the case of some of these guys, they're still running very, very old technology. Second, you have to have some aspect of regulatory help. And the regulatory help we got was MiFID, because all the incumbent exchanges were of the opinion that it would never happen to them because, their national government or their national regulator would prevent it. Of course, that wasn't the case in Europe because the national regulators, there was a specific clause in the MiFID agreement that says that concentration rules are unenforceable. Now, that was very interesting because there was one jurisdiction in Europe, as probably many of us know, that just refused, and that was Spain. And for years and years and years, you couldn't get any sensible activity apart from OTC activity trading on an organized platform in Spain because the Spanish just point blank refused to play by the MiFID rules. Okay, so point one, technology. Point two, regulation. But point three, and this is the most important, Patrick, community. You had to have a bunch of people that wanted to make a change. And we were very fortunate at Chi-X in the early days of having a bunch of people who could see that the expenses related to our friends in the incumbent exchanges were very high. Those exchanges were effectively monopolists. They could charge what they like. They could deliver pretty beep service, and nobody could go elsewhere. Where else could you go? Competition really changed that. My great story about competition was that another platform started at the same time, as you're well aware, Turquoise. I had a number of good Turquoise stories. My favorite one, of course, was that we first of all decided to call it Tortoise because it went very slowly. It took a very long time for them to get together. But I'm very closely allied with and friendly with Eli Lederman, who at the time was Dr. Lederman, who was at the time the CEO. And Eli and myself had a bit of a competition amongst ourselves. And I'm sure some of the clients were happy to help, about trying to trade more than 51% of the common stock of the London Stock Exchange. And I remember the day we did it, so that we were effectively price setting the LSE. Yeah, I had a somewhat delicious irony. So we had
that's quite entertaining altogether, and it's very interesting because actually the two questions in the queue, I'm going to give. Oh, actually, there's actually 3 comments in the queue now. But first of all, I want to pop to Ramina's question. You've partially effectively answered this, I think. What, from your experience in this situation, proved to be the best way to deal with the different laws across the European markets?
It's a good question. So the point which I think Europe has never really grasped, and lots and lots of people do try and spend lots and lots of money with, increasingly expensive law firms. It's not really the need to deal with the absolute laws in the individual countries. What's important is to deal with the law, the governing law, if you will, of the contract that you have with your clients. Now, we can argue about this, till the cows come home. But I would absolutely make the point that the biggest center in Europe for managing money, i.e., where are the clients, is London. Probably the second biggest center is in Edinburgh. If you add those two together, that is dominant in terms of the amount of money which is professionally managed. Now, okay, you can say, well, Switzerland is very large and Frankfurt's very big and Paris has got all this. But, quite frankly, an enormous number of the German and Dutch and French and Spanish and Italian shops that were investing in European markets, guess what? They were based in London. So you didn't really have to worry too much about pan-European laws. We weren't we weren't trading Italian equity in Italy. We were trading whatever it was, the actual issue. We were trading something that had been admitted to Borsa Italia. All we were doing was trading the rights, effectively.
Fascinating and a good description and point about the strength of what's been going on in terms of the European marketplace itself. We've got a fascinating comment from Tom O'Brien we'll get to in just a moment, but Alex Maturi, who's actually going to be joining us in a few weeks' time on this live stream, he's a man who effectively was the most powerful man in indexes in the world until his retirement just a few weeks ago. Do you think, Peter, that SIBO, who of course SIBO having acquired Chi-X, the platform you originally built, can SIBO develop a derivatives trading alternative, as they're saying they are going to try and do, combining the BATS platform with EuroCCP?
Well, it's an impossibly difficult question to answer. In the sense of can they develop a derivatives trading alternative? I think they can. Dave Howson, with whom I worked very closely at Equiduct, is an inspired and capable leader with a very, very acute grasp of what it is that customers want and what it is that technology can deliver. So you've got in Dave, I think, somebody who is extra special. I think we all know that the real game is in derivatives trading, and I think that there's a very good chance, therefore, that the ability to see some pretty spectacular changes in this marketplace are there. Now, you can talk about splitting liquidity, you can talk about margining and all the rest of it, and I do share those. Not concerns, but issues. But I look, if anybody can, I think BBOE can, and I think under the inspired leadership of Dave Howson, that they're off to a very good start.
So if anybody can, SIBO can, and thanks to Dave Howson and also indeed Adi Cordell, who's going to be running specifically the derivatives business, yes. You think they've got a chance, but of course, hashtag it's complicated.
Yes.
Very interesting altogether. Now, Tom O'Brien made a comment. He's saying that, well, LSE was on .net at that time and had moved off Stratos by the time Chi-X was born. It was on the Stratos mainframe, but he thinks that they changed that by then too. Thank you, Tom, for that interesting intervention in the historical world of who mainframe was what. I think the one thing we can at least agree on was that certainly the X400 IBM mainframe box still dominated the landscape of the basement of the Frankfurt Börse and indeed Deutsche Börse's headquarters just on the outskirts of town at that time. So, Peter, let's jump towards the modern day. Thank you very much once again for all of our questioners' comments, Rowena and Alex and Tom. Peter.
The lessons, Patrick, are very clear. You've got to have some technology, you've got to have some legals, and you've got to have some clients. Those are the lessons. So then taking that and saying, look, okay, we've kind of done the easy bit. The easy bit, of course, being the front office. The more complicated bit, and how much more complicated, I'm still almost day by day learning about how much more complicated is the post-trade space. But nevertheless, to go back to my original point, if you scratch the post-trade process in almost any bank, in almost any instrument, and certainly in almost any asset class, you will find somewhere, I would almost guarantee it. I'd almost put my
bottom dollar on it,
modest pension on it.
No,
I would almost guarantee that you will find somewhere in that system COBOL running on mainframe. Now, it could be in payments, it could be in reconciliations, it could be in some subgroup of something that they do. But the complexity here, guys, is just gigantic. Now, the observation was very simple. It's based around a well-known Swedish furniture store. And here's the story, really. It's not about the technology of a distributed ledger per se, but it's about doing something very clever. And what I think is very clever is something that a well-known furniture store from Sweden does. So if you go along to these places, the first thing you do is when you walk through the door is you get your trolley, and then you pull down from some shelf what it is that you want to buy. So you become a warehouseman, and then you run the trolley all the way around the store, past the chocolate biscuits, past the coffee, past the yada, 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 till you get to the checkout, where you scan it. So you become a checkout person. You then wheel it out the door, put it in the back of your car. You then become a common carrier. Take it home, take it upstairs to your student child's bedroom or whatever, and you put the thing together. You then become a fitter. You work for them 4 times in that equation. Do they pay you for that? Nah. Do they offer you marginally cheaper furniture? Well, maybe, but not really. But the trick is to turn your customers into your unpaid employees. Now, how would it be if in the post-trade maelstrom of wetting signatures and back-to-back faxes and all the rest of it, what if we had a way of recording transactions that were absolutely immutable, that were capable of being retrieved as evidence, which were utterly straightforward, but were undertaken by the various parties to the transaction? How would that be? That would be very, very different, wouldn't it? Would you need a clearinghouse? Maybe not. Why would you have a clearinghouse in the first place? Well, a clearinghouse is a buyer to every seller and a seller to every buyer. But if this was all capable of being done anonymously or pseudo-anonymously, only with participants that were permissioned into the system in the first place, so everybody was sure of the credit risk, If it was possible to lock up, take a lien over the necessary payment routes, if it was possible to take a lien over the stock so it couldn't be sold elsewhere, of course these things are possible. Turn your customers into your unpaid employees, and you take many billions of dollars out of the post-trade space. It is absurd. I'm sure you'd agree, Patrick. Absurd that I can go into a well-known coffee shop, I can order a cup of coffee at one end of the counter, pay for it, and by the time I get to the other end of the counter, they can give me a cup of coffee. If I went into a well-known bank and said I'd like to buy shares in that coffee company, take me what, 5, 7, 12, 15 days to actually get the stock onto my account. Be a little bit like going to Starbucks and saying, oh, hang on, I'm going to come in here in 2 weeks' time on Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. I'd like a latte, please. Oh, yes, Mr. Randall, pay now and we'll give you the stock. We'll give you the latte when you come back.
And also, isn't it the issue that actually they may not even give you the stock in your account, because actually they'll end up using some series of nominees. So they'll send you a little spreadsheet that says, oh, you own the stock, Peter Randall, but actually XYZ Geno 123 Corp owns the stock along with a million other people, which means that you don't really actually have the stock sitting in front of you.
So that's a great position, particularly in Europe, where the the forces of reason and rationality in the regulatory space run as clear and deep as they do anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So you would have an enormous amount of work done on CSDR, for example, mm-hmm. And then in another stream of the bureaucracy, you would have a completely separate stream done on shareholder rights directives. Mm-hmm. The two are completely incompatible, but they're both law.
Yeah.
So all that really does is sets up an opportunity for a regulator to turn up and say, well, okay, yeah, you're in compliance with this bit, but I'm afraid you've failed on that bit. Mm-hmm. So there's 100,000 records there. We're going to charge you $10 a record. Go figure.
So how do we manage to rationalize that situation then? I do believe we're about to arrive in the thumping present.
We are about to arrive in the thumping present, and the thumping present, I think, Patrick, very, very straightforwardly says, there is now technology available which can operate at speed, can operate at scale, can operate in a secure manner, and can be delivered at a sensible price. And what that effectively means is that the purveyors, sellers, and indeed the users of old-fashioned expensive technology need to be as scared today as the developers of the old-fashioned matching engines were that were much in use in the early part of this millennium.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about what you're up to these days then, Peter.
Well, I'm very fortunate. I'm very fortunate that I've helped to popularize this with the firm I'm working with at the moment, SETL, which is an enormous amount of fun, as you can tell. But I think at the broader, the bigger level, this is a sort of sea change in technology. And certainly, looking at the results from various banks in the last few days, the need to really take an axe to their old-fashioned systems. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, they're old-fashioned systems which are never fit for purpose and never really have been, certainly for the last sort of 10 years or so, because they just can't deal with the complexity of modern regulatory environment. Those old-fashioned systems are only kept going by a cast of thousands. And I think I saw some news today that HSBC was set to cut, an eye-wateringly large number of people. Well, all that really means to me, being old-fashioned, is that a whole bunch of those systems are now going to start to get into real trouble. And so therefore, large regulatory fines, yeah, but also the need to fundamentally re-engineer the environment for fit for the 21st century. You know, we couldn't switch as much data around the world as we do if we still had telephonists putting plugs into keyboards. Just couldn't be done. We still seem to think that we can do all of this with, you know, the post-trade equivalents of plugs in keyboards.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, we've got a great comment there from Christopher Messina again, because he's saying, you know, all of that and the fact that it can be input into a multi-party batch optimization process, because we've become obsessed with, in his case, he's very interested, obviously, in the whole idea of moving away from serial execution into batched execution, which is part of the point of Crowdfill, the software that he was talking about last week. But equally, the whole process of settlement, which seems to be such a relatively outmoded process with all of this technology, can do much, much better.
Yes, exactly. And you know, I don't think it's something that we need to be scared of or frightened of. I mean, it's actually not particularly revolutionary in many respects. I mean, you know, a lot of the cryptography has been around for, you know, quite a number of years. It's relatively straightforward. I mean, I think the novel application of it to financial services is something that, you know, we spotted really early on. But you know, that's, to me, you know, our advantage. I mean, I think a lot of the other stuff, certainly a lot of the non-permission stuff, the stuff that runs on Ethereum and, you know, some of the other things, that will never work in financial services, because I don't think you'll ever be able to do KYC or AML properly. But I think some of the permission stuff has, you know, real prospects of making some very attractive returns to users by lowering prices and decreasing fines. I mean, you know,
a standard issue, making things safer, more secure, commoditized, and also enabling, as Romina Farouch is making a great comment about here, you know, it can be used for monthly savings products, long-term pension plans. Everything suddenly becomes very, very easy to administer via that blockchain when it's being used as a proper, coherent scale blockchain, and not necessarily one of these things which...
Yes, I think the lacuna, if you will, in this brave new world that we're mapping out, very, very straightforward. The lacuna is that, okay, you can move the assets around wherever you like. You know, and you can move them from this custodian to that custodian, this trustee to that trustee, this asset manager to that asset manager, this individual to that individual. That's relatively straightforward. Remember, however, that actually what the act of settlement requires, and there are two bits to settlement. Of course, there's this great thing, finality. And secondly, there's also, for a whole bunch of reasons, we adopt something that we in the profession refer to as DVP, or delivery versus payment. So we can do the delivery pieces pretty straightforwardly. We can move it around, as I've already adumbrated.
Absolutely.
We need to be able to do payment, and that still means, I mean, break out of the terribly sophisticated ledger structures that you're able to run for the asset, and send a SWIFT message.
So how do we get past SWIFT?
Sorry, Patrick.
How do we get past SWIFT?
Well, how do we get past SWIFT? So all the amount of work that's being done at the moment by the central banks to think about central bank digital currency is the key that will unlock that particular problem. And I want to make just a nomenclature point here, because I think it is very important. Refer to central bank digital currency as effectively being two things. I refer to R CBDC and W CBDC. R CBDC is retail central bank digital currency, and that's £10 notes. W CBDC is wholesale central bank digital currency. Now, it was probably no surprise to anybody on this call that actually across, for example, the Bank of England on a daily basis, around 98% of all the transactions that go through RTGS, the real-time gross settlement service, which is a good proxy for this, around 98% of them are wholesale. Only 2% are retail. But of course, if you ask people about money, they all think about £10 notes. That's not the point. The point is not that, you know, I give you £10 or you give me £10, because if we do that in settlement of a debt, we have achieved settlement finality. It is when Megabank gives Uberbank the 150 million, 1.5 billion change in the ledger at the central bank, because of course the central bank is the banker's bank, where the bank's bank, when their ledgers are updated, then that money has moved, and of course it is final. You cannot, it's bankruptcy remote. So that's the position. Really straightforward. So unlocking that is going to be the next big step in this journey. But I'm very confident that we can do the first bit first, and we've already.
So that's the step in the payments chain, which ultimately revolutionizes everything in the world of money, because it enables the money to move as fast as the securities and everything else.
Yes, exactly. But you know, in a way, it just sort of, you know, it underpins the leitmotif, the zeitgeist of the age, which is, you know, why can't it be digital and why can't it be effectively instant? Because of course, if you've got the ability, even if you don't necessarily go for final settlement immediately, but if you've got the ability to lock, take a lien, or to take some form of charge over a deposit at a central bank or at somebody else's central bank, if you've got that capacity to do that, you're risk-free, because you know you're going to get paid. If you're risk-free, then you don't need a CCP.
Yes.
If you don't need a CCP, you don't have to pay for the implicit insurance. Which way of knowing how that you're going to get paid is to know that the money is there and it's locked in your name.
Yeah. Although at the same time, then there are a huge number of people who love T plus forever, T plus 5, T plus 2, T plus 1. Exactly. They make a huge amount of money out of it.
And if you're in the ETF marketplace, T plus N.
Yes. Yes. Yes, and we get to that sort of problem. So obviously there's going to be a huge amount of pushback from a certain quantity of the community who are going to be very reluctant to see this part of the revolution take place with the CBDC and the overall improvement in settlement and finality.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that sort of, in a way, you know, never underestimate the power of the incumbency. You know, the idea that some of the incumbent infrastructures are going to be able to adapt fast enough or quickly enough to make this change is in my experience just fanciful. I mean, there was nothing stopping Deutsche Börse or LSE or Euronext doing what we did with Chi-X. There was absolutely nothing stopping them at all. But it was just too difficult, because we've got this really, you know, good product. We've got this earnings stream. We've got people who are relying on us, you know, become inured to their competitive position.
But at the same time, also, as Alex Wilkinson makes the excellent point. Good evening, Alex. Great to see you today. Thank you for that. You're looking as handsome as ever in your LinkedIn photo. You still need a CCP for the leverage products, but at the same time, you can remove the CCP for a lot of that cash product.
Yes. I mean, I think you do still need a CCP for leverage products. You know, and so the question that came up earlier about CBOE and you know, their ambitions in this space. Yes, you do still need to do that, but there are all sorts of ways of thinking about being able to take some degree of the uncertainty out of the equation. So I think it's very, very complicated. But I've seen work done that I find to be interesting enough to explore, not necessarily yet compelling. And I'm not saying that you won't need some form of insurance, because obviously, you know, with a leveraged product, you've got time, and you need to be able to deal with that.
It becomes very interesting then, because actually we end up at this fascinating intersection where we could move forward for days on end, because we're cutting across, for example, some of the remarks they've made this week by Sir Paul Tucker and the Systemic Risk Council, his body in the United States of America, Sir Paul being a former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, where he's very concerned about the whole CCP resolution business. And obviously there's something in there that could manage to change things, but at the same time, there's still probably a need for a fundamental level of CCP support for a great deal of the derivatives product as traded.
Yeah.
I think on that note, Peter, I'm going to call it a day, because we've actually run our 1 hour. We've had a huge number of comments. There's obviously a lot of people very interested in the derivatives world. And to that end, I really thank Brian Gidley. He's still discussing the 0.07 basis points that we're getting, 7 basis points on 10-year UK gilt. And, you know, if we've got that on gilts with fixed income nominal rates near zero and negative real rates. Therefore, is the fixed income saver investor community ready to demand a paradigm shift? That wonderful phrase that we all loved from the 1990s, out of the 18th century and into the 21st century requirement of constant purchasing power with the ability for CCP derivatives trading and clearing. Well, certainly that could be somewhat of a revolution for the government business, the funding of government business, that is. Whether it would make them more eager to intervene in COVID times is anybody's guess. So thank you very, very much, Peter. It's been a magnificent discussion altogether. I'm most interested to hear so many of your remarks. I mean, fabulous also to remember the fact that, well, MiFID was originally known, as most institutions find it difficult. The concentration rule, something which was blown away in much of Europe, albeit, well, the Poles and the Spaniards held out for a good few years, particularly the Spaniards thereafter. But you were talking about how the whole issue of trading, clearing and settlement and the lessons of Chi-X, and therefore the whole importance of being tech appropriate for the business, which is still very, very valid to today. And equally, that whole aspect of the regulatory assistance which came to you in order to manage to power the Chi-X revolution forward, which was extremely important, and of course the power of community, amongst other points that you've made during the course of the evening. Fascinating to get you onto the topic of, well, everything in life needs to be digital and instant, just like your live stream, the IPO Live Vid this evening with Peter Randall, ladies and gentlemen, because of course when we're looking at whether it's retail central bank digital currency, the 2% or the 98%, that huge kahuna, the big whale of the wholesale central bank digital currency, it's a fascinating world out there, and certainly one that looks to have a wonderful opportunity for the blockchain revolution, as Peter has been discussing, in terms of how that can change the whole business of settlement. At the same time, it remains only to say, well, just at the moment, there is one thing, of course, which is even more important than blockchain in our everyday lives, and that is, of course, the spectre of COVID-19. We appear to be on the cusp of wave 2, ladies and gentlemen, provoked by an outbreak of holidaying and these sort of parties, which, it has to be said, I don't tend to get invited to, and generally younger folks indulge themselves in a lot of, well, somewhat headstrong, low latency, low proximity, and some might say low touch, but certainly interactions with heady substances and other folks not in their immediate circle of social distance. Many are not wearing their face masks too. Tisk, tisk. Why is that very relevant? Because, of course, what are we looking at, ladies and gentlemen? It's a derivatives world. We're not worried just about how many people are infected. We're worried about the Greek letters. To that effect, R seems to be incredibly important back in the language of COVID, but indeed, and in fact, this is something perhaps Christopher Messina, Alex Maturi, Peter Randall, and also our other guests, and indeed Alex Wilkinson this evening, could be looking at. Maybe we need a whole array of Greek letters in order to manage to calculate the trajectory of the COVID-19 virus. My name is Patrick L. Young. Thank you very much for joining me. This has been an IPO VID live production. Don't forget, if you get a chance, please try and buy the book, Victory or Death, my latest interaction discussing blockchain cryptocurrency in the fintech world. Many things that would be said very obviously in terms of well, what we've been discussing today. And yes, thank you very much, Chris Messina, for that excellent remark. COVID-19 has spread most readily in T+3 regimes, certainly those with longer settlement times. Without the need for quarantine, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be back in 7 days. My guest then is going to be Martin Watkins, an esteemed luminary of the parish of exchanges, just as, indeed, Peter Randall has been for many, many years, and Christopher Messina before him. I want to say thank you very much. Do check in to Exchange Invest, either the weekly podcast, which is free, or look at subscribing to our daily newsletter all about the parish of markets, businesses, and exchanges. To all of our contributors today, Romina, Brian, Alex, it's been a joy to have you here. Thank you very much, Tom, as well. And of course, Christopher, our guest from last week. But last but by no means least, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Peter Randall, coming to us today from, well, demonstrating the digital world reaches everywhere, even Wales. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Peter, for making this an excellent IPO VID Live. We'll be back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. London. My name is Patrick L. Young. Thank you very much for watching and have a great week in Life and Markets.